Booktube, it's Kim at Middle of the Bookmarch, and I have my results for the Octofinals for the Booktube Prize. I just watched the Octofinals results video earlier this morning. I'm filming this on Saturday the 1st, and I am deliriously happy because all three of my top 3 books made it to the quarterfinals. So I wanted to give you the rundown of what I thought about each of the 6 books that I read in Nonfiction Group D. I picked nonfiction this year specifically because I wanted to read more nonfiction. And I'm really glad I did that because I found some great books, I read some terrible books, and I had a great time doing it. So let's get into it. And I'm going to tell you about the books from my least favorite, number 6, to my most favorite at number 1. Now, I had 2 memoirs. Yes, I had 2 memoirs and then 4 either history or general nonfiction. So my book in last place, number 6, was Lost and Found, a memoir by Catherine Schultz. Catherine Schultz is a staff writer for The New Yorker. She's a Pulitzer winner for another of her articles. This book was based on an essay called Losing Streak. This is a very short memoir about a couple of things. It is about her meeting her wife about 18 months before her father died after a long time of chronic illness. And the description of the book says it is a brilliant exploration of the role that loss and discovery, brilliant exploration of the role of loss and discovery, how they combine. No, that's not true. It's full of wonder, joy, and wretchedness and suffering. No, also not true. She starts the book by talking about lost, like lost and found, lost. She talks about her dad. Her dad was suffering from a lot of chronic illness for a long time, for, 15, 20 years. And he was sick a lot. So it was, his family watching him be ill and uncomfortable. And she says herself in her book, she had a beautiful childhood. She has a sister. Her parents adored them. They adored each other. Everybody loved each other. It was a wonderful way to grow up, a wonderful childhood. Her father came from a family that was destroyed in the Holocaust, and they are just a lovely, loving, outgoing Jewish family. And she talks a lot about how wonderful her father is. But in the same section of Lost, she relates, he dies, and she relates his death to losing keys or losing her phone. And she relates the fact that she and her mother are very tidy and organized, and so they rarely lose things. And her dad and her sister are identical in that they used to lose everything. So trying to extrapolate losing your keys to dealing with the loss of your father was just bizarre. It was totally bizarre. And then in the section on Found, she discusses her wife, when she met her wife and how she met her. She starts to discuss this woman as if she is perfect. This is the perfect woman. And she goes on to explain to the reader why we should believe that her wife is perfect. When you portray a human as perfect, you remove their humanity. You remove the reality that we all have faults, we all have flaws, and you remove the nuance from another human, because you can't have a robotic, perfect human being. But then when she's trying to connect the two, it's like they were 2 different memoirs, and she also defines for us what love is. And she's like, and it sounds as if she's saying, the Oxford Dictionary defines love as, and she goes on to define. She defines what it means to lose things over and on and on. And at the end of the book, the "and" part, she's talking about philosophers and philosophy. Why? I don't know. A short memoir that bored me to tears. I thought it was very trite. It didn't connect. None of it connected with each other. I'm not sure this was simply taking a speech and making it a memoir was enough. It was a bad memoir. It was a poorly written memoir. So that was clearly my number 6. My number 5 was the other memoir, which is Fatty Fatty Boom Boom by Rabia Chaudhry. It's a memoir about food, fat, and her immigrant family. She comes from a Pakistani family. They immigrated to the U.S. when she was a toddler. And she has a sister and a younger brother. This book has a lot of triggers if you are a person who works with and lives with disordered eating, with weight issues, with weight management, with self-esteem surrounding weight and food. Triggers on every page. This would be not the book for you to pick up. She talks about living her Pakistani family from Pakistan. Big, close-knit Pakistani family. She talks about the food, the recipes. It sounds brilliant. It sounds just totally delicious. But she also then discusses why her family moved to the U.S. She was a baby, and I kid you not, she's talking about her parents feeding her 2 bottles of half and half every day to kind of plump her up. They gave her sticks of butter to snack on. Sticks of butter. Frozen sticks of butter. And they returned to Pakistan to see their families. And when they got there, the families looked at Rabia as a small child, as a toddler, and asked her parents, "What did you do to her?" They created this child who, at a very, very young age, was so grossly overweight according to weight standards that they created her, and then they hurled abuse at her, verbal abuse about her weight. They raised her believing nobody would ever want to marry her because she was fat or because of her weight, even though they were the ones that created the system. She grew up on fast food, almost exclusively. Fast food, junk food, sugar, soda. The family traveled back and forth to Pakistan, and it was one abusive comment after another. She went up and down in weight through her whole life, her teenage years, her young adult years. She entered into an arranged marriage with a man who was violent towards her, ended up getting a divorce. There's triggers everywhere. Domestic abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. I don't know. She's a podcaster, and her podcast is named Undisclosed. She's also an attorney, and she was the human rights attorney to Adnan Syed's case, and I don't know a lot of details about that, but it's definitely something you can look up. She actually, by the end of the book, she basically says, but I wasn't that fat. And so she literally erases any positive progress that she has towards weight and weight issues and food. And she has what you can absolutely discern as self-loathing because of her weight. So it was, just very poorly done. My number 4 book is The Story of Russia by Orlando Figes. Orlando Figes is a Russian historian and an academic and an author, extremely well known for his Russian history. This book was suspiciously short. This was, a little over 300 pages, and I'm like, shouldn't the story of Russia be a lot longer than shouldn't this be coming to me in volumes of work? But it wasn't really the story of Russia. It was the account of how the Russians, including citizens and their leadership, have used Russian history, including mythology and folk history, to redefine who they are, to redefine the image the rest of the world has of Russia. And it's very interesting how Russian politicians have used their past and what they want to spin as the past of Russian people and Russian history to create an image for the rest of the world. It could be completely inaccurate. It could be completely gross lies, but that's what latest politicians, according to Figes, have done in order to create the image of Russia that the rest of the world sees. It was extremely dry, very dry for a lay reader. It was one name after another, starting back in like the 15th, 16th centuries. A lot of warriors and battles, and extremely dry. The last quarter of the book was interesting to me, and that's where I could connect where all of these names came in, where all of the battles came in. Nope. No. So it was a decent book. It wasn't horrible, but no, it was my number 4. Now we're in the top 3. I am giddy that my top 3 picks all moved on to the quarterfinals. I'm really happy about that. My 3rd book is River of the Gods by Candice Millard. Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile. This is the story of 2 explorers who teamed together to find the source of the Nile River in the mid-1800s. This is the story of Richard Burton and John Hanning Speke. They were sent out by the Royal Geographical Society in England to find the source of the Nile River. And they hated each other. They became venomous enemies and couldn't stand each other, but worked together for years in conditions that were disgusting and horrifying, caused death, almost had both of them die. They had so many members of their teams die from illness or animals or whatever it was. And this is the story of these 2 men who were racist, sexist, colonialist pricks. And it's like, I'm reading this book thinking, why? Why is this interesting to anybody? And I wrote down a description of my thoughts of who these people were. They were 2 arrogant, petulant, self-aggrandizing, toxic man-babies who were so cocky and arrogant to think that they could find the source of the Nile River, and they were going to report it to the world, and they were going to be infamous and famous. And they couldn't get their act together. They hated each other. They were working against each other. They were gathering information separate from the other one. They were each taking the glory and the limelight for themselves. It's like, dudes, get your shit together. But the way Millard wrote the book was just, I couldn't put it down. I kept reading. I thought how awful these people were. They were just gross. And one of them went on to begin a porn society, and not kidding, cannibal porn. But it was so gross and so horrifying and gross and disgusting and gross, and it was gross some more. But she's an awesome writer, and I was so fascinated with how awful these people were. I really didn't care about the source of the Nile. I didn't care where it begins, but they did kind of figure that out. But just the accounts of their personalities was what hooked me to that book. Yeah, that was my number 3. My number 2, Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting at World War II at home and abroad by Matthew F. Delmont. He is a civil rights expert and activist and a Dartmouth history professor. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It is the account of African Americans in World War II. There were approximately 1 million African American men and women who fought and who served in World War II. And the level of racism and prejudice and exclusion that these people experienced is just, I'm going to use the same word, it's gross. It is electrifying. It is enraging. It made me so angry and emotional that these enlisted people, these soldiers, these service people went through this. He discusses the way that when they left, when World War II was over, and these veterans left service, they were denied housing, they were denied educational opportunities, they were denied all kinds of veterans benefits, including health care. And I'm going to have to pause this video for a second. Sorry, my granddaughter was calling me. No, not by herself. But yeah, so I was definitely going to stop this video to talk to her. Where was I? Okay, yeah, and these black soldiers and black service people were denied all kinds of benefits. This was a very clear time in history where redlining was rampant, where it was acceptable to deny black people their deserved benefits. It was acceptable to be prejudiced and racist. There were moments in the south of our country after World War II where black service people appeared in uniform and were beaten, were lynched, were killed in every other way, were made humiliating examples of. And it's unreal. It's unreal that they wanted to serve their country. They wanted to be part of the group that went to war for a purpose that we all believed in. And yet this is what happened to them. It's a travesty of justice. And it's an excellent book. It's an excellent book. And the history that Delmont put into it, the research, and the emotions. He also brings up Thurgood Marshall, as he was a member of the an attorney with the NAACP, who brought the violence to light, who exposed the violence and the prejudice to the American country. He talks about the Tuskegee Airmen and the development of those airmen and those flyers, an all-black troop of flyers. He talks about Langston Hughes, the poet, who was a war correspondent. And Langston Hughes, I believe, also served in the Spanish Civil War, which they used as an example of how to treat their black service people. They were allowed to serve in the Spanish Civil War as fighters and people on the ground in battles. The American government did not want black people to go to war on the front lines. They didn't think they were capable of it. And this book is so illuminating, and it's an excellent example of a dark period in American history, but something we should all know, we should all read. So yes, highly recommend that one. My last book, number 1, is fantastic. And this is Paradise Falls by Keith O'Brien. I always want to say Kevin. Keith O'Brien. The True Story of an Environmental Catastrophe. This is a book about Love Canal. And if you don't know what Love Canal is an area in upstate New York, right on the edge of Niagara Falls. So right on the kind of the falls, the river border of Canada. And this is the story of how a few suburban housewives discovered the abject corruption and greed and the land that they ruined by dumping chemicals from the Hooker chemical plant in the 40s and 50s, and how it devastated Love Canal, which is what they nicknamed it in these neighborhoods in New York. There was green sludge rising from these burial sites to a playground next to a school. There were puddles of chemicals that were oozing into people's backyards and their basements. There were children that were getting chronically ill. There were birth defects. There were people that died from cancers, all kinds of stuff. And the people that became the frontline activists were full-time wives and mothers who were watching their husbands get sick from their laboring jobs that they had at these factories. They were watching their children get terminal diseases. They were there when their children died in their arms from cancers that children should never be that nobody should get cancer. But I think you know what I'm trying to say. Children were dying of things they should never die of. There were genetic abnormalities. I mean, one thing after another after another. And it was the women who brought all of these things to the media, that exposed it all, that became homegrown activists to make changes. They brought this all the way to the presidency and Jimmy Carter. And they made the government pay attention. Another dark point in American history that I am so glad I read. I never would have picked this book up on my own. I never would have discovered it if it wasn't for the Booktube Prize. And I'm so glad I read it. I checked it out from the library, and then I loved it so much I went and bought my own copy. That's how that goes. So I absolutely recommend Paradise Falls by Keith O'Brien. Those are my results for the Octofinals for the Booktube Prize in Nonfiction Group D. I hope you liked it. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I am not judging for the quarterfinals, but I hope to jump back into the semifinals, and we'll see what I get from there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.